Before we jump into this crazy story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Maybe you're kicking back in a sunny beach house in Florida, stuck in rush hour traffic in Los Angeles, or relaxing in a cozy mountain cabin in Colorado. I love seeing how far these Karen stories of drama and karma can reach across the world. The morning sun had only just begun to stretch across the rows of identical rooftops when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand. The air was cool, sharp with dew, the kind of morning where everything should have been calm. Instead, my eyes locked on something so out of place that my chest tightened immediately. A wide, raw trench ran jagged across the middle of my neatly trimmed yard, slicing through the grass like a wound. Strands of yellow and red cables tangled in the dirt, half buried, their plastic casings glistening under the light. My coffee sloshed as my grip faltered. For a moment, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. But the muddy footprints stamped along the trench told me this nightmare was real. What the hell? I muttered, stepping off the porch. The smell of wet soil filled my nose as I crouched at the edge of the gouge in my yard. The grass, which I'd spent hours aerating and tending, was shredded in clumps. My hand brushed against the dirt. It was still loose, fresh, like whoever had done this had been here only hours ago. I followed the line with my eyes, across my yard, under my fence, stretching straight toward the street. My pulse thudded in my ears. That's when the voices hit me. Sharp, nasal, cutting across the quiet morning. Well, he finally noticed. I looked up to see Rachel and Lauren striding from the house across the street, their floral blouses straining at the seams as they waved their arms in exaggerated gestures. Rachel's brown hair was pinned tight in a bun, and her expression carried the smugness of a person convinced the world bent to her will. Lauren, with short red-brown curls bouncing around her flushed face, trailed slightly behind, but her smirk was no less irritating. "You two did this," I shouted, my voice breaking through the stillness. Rachel lifted her chin, smirking. "Of course we did. The neighborhood needs better internet. You should be thanking us for finally putting your useless yard to work." My jaw clenched. "That's private property. You can't just dig through my lawn like it's some kind of utility easement." Lauren laughed, a grating sound. "Oh, please. It's community property when it benefits everyone. Don't be so dramatic." I stood, fists tightening at my sides. "Show me where the HOA approved this." "Right now." Rachel didn't flinch. Instead, she produced a crumpled sheet of paper from her purse and waved it like a royal decree. "Right here. Permission granted." I snatched the paper from her hand and scanned it. It wasn't an official permit. It wasn't even HOA stationery. Just a typed paragraph about community improvements, signed only by Rachel herself. My lip curled. "This is a joke," I said, shoving the paper back toward her. "You forged this." Lauren crossed her arms, her floral shirt riding up as she sneered. "Who's going to stop us? The board? We practically run the board. Nobody cares except you." Their arrogance hit like a slap. These two had always been loud, always meddling. But this was a new level. They had cut into my yard like they owned it, left a scar that couldn't be ignored. My yard wasn't just grass. It was mine, maintained with sweat and weekends, one of the few spaces I had full control over. Now it had been violated without a second thought. "I'm calling the HOA president," I snapped, pulling out my phone. Rachel smirked as if she'd been waiting for me to say that. "Go ahead. She already knows." We explained everything last week, told her it was a community upgrade project. She was very supportive. Lauren added, "You'll just embarrass yourself." Again. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I dialed anyway. The president answered, her tone weary before I even explained. When I told her what happened, she sighed heavily. Rachel and Lauren mentioned a project. They said the neighborhood voted. I thought it was handled. "They lied," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is my property, and I never agreed to this." Her silence told me everything. She wasn't going to fight them. By the time I hung up, Rachel and Lauren were grinning like they'd won. "Told you," Rachel sang, her voice thick with triumph. "Fine," I muttered. "Then I'll call the police." Lauren's grin faltered slightly, but Rachel barked a laugh. Oh, do it. Let's waste taxpayer money because you're upset about some grass. Civil matter, honey. They'll just tell you to take it up with the HOA, which, by the way, we control. Her words burned. She was right. The police shrugged when they arrived later, dismissing it as a property dispute. I was left standing there, stomach twisting as the sisters stood behind the officer, smirking and whispering like schoolyard bullies. Days passed, and their cables remained. They stretched like a tripwire across my yard. My lawnmower jammed when I tried to cut near them. The soil around the trench refused to settle, leaving uneven ground that caught my shoe. I couldn't cross my own yard without seeing the insult carved into it. And then came the kids. Neighborhood children chasing a ball stumbled on the exposed wires, one of them scraping his knees. His parents shot me a look as if I had left the mess there on purpose. My face flushed hot. This wasn't just inconvenience anymore. It was danger. That evening, I caught Rachel and Lauren loitering by the trench again, pointing at the cables as if admiring their handiwork. I stepped outside, my voice sharp. You need to move this line before someone gets hurt. Rachel turned slowly, her smirk unwavering. Or what? You'll call your imaginary lawyer. Lauren giggled. Better watch yourself. Keep pushing us, and you'll regret it. Their taunts echoed long after they waddled back across the street. I stood frozen, the shovel leaning against my shed, catching my eye. My hand twitched toward it. My pulse was thunder in my ears. I tried reason. I tried authority. Both had failed. Their line wasn't just an eyesore anymore. It was a symbol of their control, their arrogance, their belief that they could walk over anyone and face no consequences. That night I sat at my dining table, staring through the window at the trench glowing faintly under the porch light. The cables glistened like veins, pulsing with insult. I gripped my mug, the ceramic warm against my palms, but my insides were ice. If they wanted war, they just declared it. I leaned back, eyes still locked on the trench. The decision already forming in my mind, though I hadn't said it aloud yet. I wasn't going to beg, and I wasn't going to wait for permission. The shovel in my shed seemed to gleam even in the dark, waiting. Before we move on, I've got to mention one of my absolute best stories. It's about a screaming Karen who demanded my business partner's first-class seat and instantly regretted it. That one's wild from start to finish, and I've linked it in the description and end screen. Stick around after this story to check it out. You won't want to miss it. The sisters did not stop at tearing up my yard. They seemed to feed on the tension, as if my anger was proof of their power. Every day after that morning, they invented new ways to remind me of their presence. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a fluorescent orange paper taped to my fence. The word notice was scrawled in thick marker, the handwriting sloppy but oversized, as though sheer volume might make it official. Beneath it, a crude warning. This section of property is designated community easement. Unauthorized removal of fiber optic lines will result in penalties. Signed, again, with Rachel's sweeping, self-important script. I tore the paper down and stuffed it into my pocket, the edges crumpling in my fist. It wasn't just the vandalism or the fake authority. It was the audacity. They wanted me to feel cornered, powerless, like a trespasser on my own land. And judging by the way neighbors glanced at me when I stepped outside, it was working. Rachel had started whispering at HOA gatherings that I was unstable, that I was harassing them. I saw the looks, the hesitation in greetings that used to be easy. She was rewriting the story before my eyes. But I wasn't sitting idle. Every notice, every rumor, every footprint in my soil, I documented it all. My phone's gallery filled with photos of shredded turf, time-stamped images of the trench, recordings of their mocking laughter echoing across the street. I built a file, not because I trusted the HOA or the police to care, but because I knew eventually proof would matter. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. I had spent the morning raking leaves, trying to distract myself, when I heard muffled voices outside. At first I thought it was just more of their gossip, but when I stepped to the window, my stomach dropped. There they were, standing in my yard with shovels. Rachel's floral blouse clung damply to her back as she leaned into the dirt, sweat streaking her temple. Lauren stood nearby, her red-brown curls matted against her forehead, pushing the cable deeper into the trench with the heel of her shoe. Laughter spilled from them, cruel and casual, like this was nothing more than a game. My flowers near the fence were trampled flat under their careless movements. I stormed out, the screen door slamming behind me. "Get off my property." Rachel straightened, shovel still in her hand, her grin wide and shameless. "Relax. We're just securing the line, so your mower doesn't ruin it again. This isn't your land." I shouted, my voice cracking with fury. "I've told you to stop." Lauren chuckled, brushing dirt from her palms. "Then stop us." "Oh wait. You can't." Their contempt was suffocating. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming to rip the shovel from Rachel's hands and drive them both off my lawn. Instead, I stepped back, fist shaking. They wanted me to lash out, to give them a scene they could twist into a weapon. Rachel tilted her head, her eyes glinting. That's what I thought. Then they left, slow and deliberate, leaving behind deeper scars in the soil and a fury that burned hotter than before. That night I didn't sleep. I sat hunched over my laptop, the glow painting my face in restless blue. I searched for answers, laws, precedents, anything that gave me leverage. Hours slipped by as I dug into property rights, scanning state websites and municipal records. My heart leapt when I found what I needed. My property had no easement for utilities. None. The trench they had carved was pure trespass, a violation without question. I called a local fiber company the next morning. My voice was steady but tight when I described the cable. The technician on the line paused, then chuckled softly. "That's not ours. No licensed crew buries a line like that. Someone spliced into service illegally." The confirmation was a spark in the darkness. Proof. They hadn't just trespassed, they had stolen. To be sure, I contacted a lawyer. He reviewed my notes, my photos, my documents. His verdict was clear. The line was unauthorized. I had every right to remove it. I could even bill them for damages and labor. The words settled into me like steel. I didn't have to tolerate this. I didn't have to wait for someone else to fight my battle. The power was mine if I was willing to take it. The plan began to form in quiet pieces. Document everything. Dig up the line. Disconnect it fully. Then present the bill, not as a threat, but as a fact. Their arrogance had convinced them I was cornered. They had no idea I was about to turn the walls against them. When the house across the street finally went dark that night, I moved. The air was thick and damp, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. I pulled on work gloves, strapped a headlamp across my forehead, and lifted the shovel from the shed. Its weight was solid, grounding. The first thrust into the soil was louder than I expected, the crunch of earth and rock breaking the silence. I froze, listening, but no window lit up across the street. Slowly, methodically, I worked along the trench. Dirt piled beside me, the cables emerging like snakes unearthed from their burrow. They were crudely spliced, bound with cheap tape, evidence of desperation disguised as innovation. The night smelled of cut soil and sweat. Each time my shovel struck, I imagined their laughter, their smug faces, and it fueled me. Inch by inch, the cables came free. I coiled them carefully, stacking them in neat circles on my driveway, a growing pile of evidence. Near the fence, I found a small plastic box hidden under loose gravel. I pried it open, and there it was, the heart of their theft. A crude splitter tapping directly into the service, wires knotted like veins. I snapped photo after photo, my gloves smudged with dirt as I handled the proof. The silence of the street pressed against me, broken only by the scrape of my shovel and the rhythmic pull of cable sliding from the earth. By the time I reached the last section, sweat had soaked my shirt, but the rush in my chest kept me steady. I straightened, holding the final severed length of line in my gloved hand. It dangled heavy, limp, powerless. For the first time in weeks, I felt taller, my shoulders unburdened. Across the street, their windows remained dark. They had no idea their grip on me had already been cut. I stood there in the glow of my porch light, the cable stretched across my palms like a trophy. The trench behind me was empty, a scar waiting to be healed. The sisters had trespassed, mocked, and bullied. But now I held the evidence of their crime, and soon enough, they would face the weight of it. I coiled the last of the cable on top of the pile, dirt crumbling from it as it landed with a muted thud. My breath slowed. My gloves were filthy, my arms sore, but a calm I hadn't felt in weeks settled over me. They wanted me powerless. They wanted me humiliated. Instead, I now had the weapon that would end this. I looked at the trench one last time before heading inside. The war was far from over, but the battlefield had already shifted. The morning after my midnight excavation began with shouting. I stepped onto the porch to find Rachel and Lauren planted at the edge of my driveway, their faces blotched red with fury. The pile of cable I had stacked neatly now lay in plain sight, coiled like a nest of dead serpents. Rachel's voice cracked the calm air. "You destroyed our property." Her words rang shrill, shaking with outrage more than fear. I walked down the steps, gloves still tucked into my belt. "Correction," I said evenly. "I removed illegal equipment from my yard. Equipment you had no right to bury there." Lauren stomped forward, her floral blouse fluttering like a gaudy flag. "That was thousands of dollars worth of installation. You'll be paying for this." I bent down and picked up the top coil of cable, holding it out toward them. The dirt smeared across the casing shone under the rising sun. "No," I said, voice low but cutting. "You'll be paying me." Their mouths snapped shut for a moment, caught off guard by my calmness. Then Rachel sneered. "What are you even talking about?" I reached into my folder and unfolded the packet I had prepared the night before. Photos of the trench, the fake notices, the crude splitter box, all neatly printed and arranged. I let the papers fan out so the images caught the light. "This," I said, "is a record of your trespassing, vandalism, and theft. This," I flipped to the next page, "is a copy of my property deed, which clearly shows no easement. And this," I drew out the final sheet, crisp and deliberate, "is an invoice. $3,800. Damages, labor, lawn repair, and consultation fees." Lauren's face crumpled. Rachel laughed harshly, though the sound cracked under strain. "You think some piece of paper is going to scare us? We'll sue you into the ground." I smiled without warmth. "Please do. I'd love to explain to a judge why you tunneled through my yard to steal internet service. I'd love to show him these photos. And I'd really love to hand him this audio recording of you threatening me." Their eyes flicked to the phone in my pocket. Their confidence wavered. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the rising volume. A man across the street leaned on his truck, arms crossed. A woman walking her dog paused at the sidewalk, phone angled discreetly. The sisters noticed too. Their voices grew louder, shriller, trying to command the stage. Rachel pointed a shaking finger at me. "He's lying. We were told it was community property." I raised my voice deliberately so everyone could hear. "These women buried a private fiber optic line across my yard without permission. They damaged my property and put children at risk with their exposed wiring. I have every piece of evidence to prove it." Gasps and whispers rippled through the onlookers. Phones came out, cameras recording. Rachel's face twisted as she realized the tide was turning. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her bravado leaking away under the weight of public scrutiny. Rachel barked, "Turn those cameras off. This is harassment." But her demand only drew more eyes. For once, the spotlight she craved was her undoing. I set the folder down on the hood of my car, tapping the invoice once more. "You have until the end of the week to pay. If not, I'll file a claim, and you'll not only owe me, but you'll be facing charges for theft of service." The crowd murmured. Someone clapped quietly, the sound spreading into a ripple of approval. Rachel's face flushed darker, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a comeback that wouldn't come. Lauren tugged at her sister's arm, whispering frantically. Rachel shook her off, but her eyes darted nervously to the neighbors, to the cameras, to the coils of cable that lay like evidence at her feet. For the first time, she looked cornered. The HOA president arrived later that afternoon, summoned by the growing buzz. I met her at the curb and handed over the folder. Her expression shifted as she flipped through the evidence. Shock, then irritation, then resignation. When she faced Rachel and Lauren, her tone was clipped. You violated multiple HOA codes. Fines will be issued, and you will resolve this invoice, one way or another. Rachel sputtered, protesting, but the president cut her off. Enough. You overstepped, and everyone knows it. The sisters' downfall unfolded faster than I expected. By the following week, a notice went out to the neighborhood. Rachel and Lauren fined heavily for unauthorized projects and harassment of a homeowner. Their internet service, once a badge of their supposed power, was abruptly cut off when the provider discovered the illegal splice. They didn't take it quietly. One evening, Rachel stood in the middle of the street, screaming about conspiracies and vendettas, her words dissolving into incoherent rage. Lauren sat on the curb nearby, face in her hands, mumbling about how unfair it was to be left without Wi-Fi. Neighbors stood at a distance, some recording, some laughing openly. The mighty Karen sisters, self-proclaimed rulers of the block, had been reduced to a spectacle. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, my lawn freshly reseeded and the trench already fading into memory. The sight of them unraveling was almost too poetic. Days later, contractors arrived at their property, heavy equipment rumbling as they dug proper trenches along their side. I sipped my coffee and listened to the grind of machinery, knowing every cent of that installation was coming from their pockets. One of my neighbors strolled by, giving me a small salute. About time someone stood up to them, he said. Better late than never, I replied. Rachel and Lauren avoided me now, their eyes averted whenever they crossed paths with me. The arrogance that once fueled them had evaporated, replaced with sullen silence. Their downfall was complete, but my satisfaction wasn't rooted in revenge. It was in the restoration of balance. My yard was mine again. My dignity was intact. And justice, for once, had landed squarely where it belonged. On a bright Saturday morning, I sat on my porch swing, the grass green, and even once more, the sun warm on my shoulders. Across the street, the sisters' house looked quieter than it ever had, curtains drawn, their voices absent from the air. The neighborhood seemed lighter without their constant noise. I leaned back, letting the swing creak gently. The memory of the trench, the cables, the shouting, it all felt distant now, like a storm that had finally broken. But the lesson lingered, sharp and undeniable. Funny thing about buried lies, I murmured to myself. They always get dug up in the end. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the silence, then glanced at the camera still mounted above my porch. So what would you have done? I asked softly, as if to the audience I knew was out there. Let me know down below. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and share. Because around here, you never know what the neighbors will try next.